Hello, everybody. Welcome to How Transparency Can Elevate Readers' Trust. Today, we're with JournalList, which is a media transparency initiative that is building a simple system to address this challenge, relying on connections among the members of the VPA and other news media organizations. JournalList helps distinguish fact-based reporting from the digital outliers that masquerade as journalists. Today, we have Mark Stencil, who is the executive director of JournalList. He is also the co-director of the Duke Reporters Lab, a research center that develops fact-checking tools to counter misinformation around the world. He previously worked at NPR, Congressional Quarterly, and the Washington Post. We also have Ralph Brown, who is a retired ex-CTO of Cable Labs and board member of JournalList. Ralph was a mentor and coach to Scott Yates, who was the founder of JournalList, while Scott was an innovator in the residence at Cable Labs. So I'll hand it off to you, Mark and Ralph.
Well, thank you so much. We are thrilled to be working with the Virginia Press Association and all of your members, and excited to be able to provide some tools that we think can help address this the masquerade party that you were just talking about, Rachel. There are a lot of websites out there that present themselves as news sites, as we've all seen, that are really just major sources of misinformation and disinformation. They intentionally try to create news-like content, but for purposeful means, rather than trying to inform the public and provide the kind of serious and fair-minded coverage that the news organizations and VPA work with. And we work with other associations around the country. There's 7 press and broadcast associations that have opened their membership to joining this system. And we think it's a system that is pretty simple and straightforward, slightly different than what others are trying to do. And I should probably let Ralph, as one of the co-creators of trust.txt, the basis of our system, to tell us how it works.
Sure. Thanks, Rachel. Really appreciate being here and having an opportunity to explain JournalList and the trust.txt ecosystem. As you mentioned, I was a mentor to Scott Yates. That's how I met him when he was an innovator in residence at Cable Labs, where he came up with the idea of JournalList and the trust.txt ecosystem. When I retired, Scott asked me to join the board. So I've been a participant as a board member and helping Scott out as founder and chairman of the board to try and promote the ecosystem. So the trust.txt ecosystem is, as Mark said, very simple, but as simple as it is, it's very, very powerful. And it's really kind of based on the old adage that you're known by the company that you keep. So it's really about making the relationships among news organizations, press associations, et cetera, transparent, public in a very standard way. So let me share my screen and show you a few things about, Rachel, if you could allow me to share my screen.
All right, I think you're good.
Great, thank you. So here is a trust.txt file. This happens to be the JournalList trust.txt file. And as you can see, the Virginia Press Association is identified as a member. So it's a simple text file that identifies various relationships. So members are identified, members of an association, JournalList is an association, are identified by member equals. So we identify all of our membership. And then, as you can say, VPA net is one of them. So if we look at the Virginia Press Association's trust file, you can see they say they belong to JournalList.net. So you can see that the relationship is agreed upon on both sides, and that's very powerful. And you can see that all the members of the Virginia Press Association, and Inside Nova is one of those, and they're kind of an interesting example because they use a bit more of the various types of relationships. So they identify the associations that they belong to, the local media consortium, news leaders, Virginia Press, and JournalList. So they're members of all those associations. They also have more than one website. So they actually control a number of other websites. So this identifies that relationship in terms of ownership. So they control these websites. And then they also identified their social networks. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and others can be identified through this social equals attribute. And then they list contact information. So those are the primary types of relationships that can be expressed. There's also a vendor. There's a thing called disclosure. But those are the various things. And to give you a little bit of background on sort of how large this ecosystem is today, there are over 3,000 websites that are identified through the trust.txt ecosystem. About 3,000 of those are publishers. Almost 160 of those are press associations. There are 10 vendors that are identified. And so that gives you a sense of the scope of the ecosystem. And that association is interesting, but it becomes a lot more interesting when you actually see what that social graph that results from all of those relationships actually looks like. So let me show you what that social graph looks like. So this diagram you see here on the right shows the entire ecosystem. And you can see the color coding here is blue dots are publishers, green dots are associations, and yellow dots, if you can see them, those are vendors like content management systems providers. And those all are identified through these relationships. So one of the things you can see from all of this is a very tightly coupled, well linked ecosystem. But over here in the lower right, you have all of these outliers. They stand out by the fact that they're not connected to anybody. They're connected to themselves, but they're not really connected to anybody else. And so those outliers stand out and can be noted as being, it's questionable that these might be really valid news sites. And whereas others, like Inside Nova, are, as shown here on the left, shows a very rich set of relationships between the Virginia Press Association, JournalList, the sites that they control, and other news associations that they belong to. So using this, the platforms, Google, Facebook, others, can then use that to as a signal to identify, is this a well-connected site, or is it a standalone that's somewhat suspicious? And it raises the credibility of those sorts of websites.
So just to go back to the misinformation, disinformation problem that we're starting with, this infrastructure that Ralph is describing, it might sound really intricate, but it's, again, fairly simple. A journalist has a trust file that sort of connects to all of the participating news organizations and the media outlets that are affiliated with those organizations and associations. And each of those entities put a file on their website. It's a simple .txt file. The example of Inside Nova being a perfect example. And those connections represented in Ralph's graphical presentation shows how we can link arms together essentially and say, we are members of the news media. We are people who work with other news organizations. We're in alignment with other news organizations. Each one is independent and different, but as a network, we have attributes from these connections to various associations and organizations and networks and so on that emphasize our journalistic standards and affiliations. And those affiliations become we're by making this affiliation system into a form of data, readable files, platforms like social media channels, search engines can all use that to say, oh, these organizations are part of this news network, this national, if not global news network that will allow us to see these are the sites whose content we can trust, and they can choose, each of those platforms, how to use this data to elevate serious news and make that available to the public. So it's a somewhat roundabout system because we're working through third parties like platforms, but those platforms, of course, are the main way that people get to most news content. And we're going to try to make it simpler for those organizations to keep track of who's who and who's reliable.
And Mark, how do you prevent other people from posting their own trust files?
That's a great question. And what happens is anyone can put a trust file up. It's an open spec. Our website lists how it works. It gives you the format to make your trust file, and you can then put it up on your website and you're out in the ether. The trick is who's connected, who is that site going to connect to? So if I'm the purveyor of misinformation.com and I want to sneak into the JournalList trust.txt system, I might put up my text file, but if they don't have an actual connection to a serious news organization or association, they become one of those outliers that Ralph represented in that graphic. They are standalone entities. They might link to other sister publications in that group of misinformation distributors, but they're not connected to VPA members or the Alliance for Audited Media or Digital Content Next, any of the other organizations that are working on this system. And so they end up as little islands, and that the lack of connection is what helps the other platforms say, we don't want to look at those folks, but the serious news people are over here.
And so what will the trust.txt do for VPA readers or VPA members readers?
It's a great question. So it is largely based on how we can help the major platforms elevate our journalism and help single it out and point out what's most reliable. We give them this trust signal based on these affiliations as a mechanism that makes all of our news content much more accessible and differentiated from all the other content that might be flowing through all those different systems. And we'll let the various and assorted platforms around the world decide how best to do that themselves. But what we're doing as a news industry organization is saying, here we are, we're giving you a system that says who is a legit news source and who is not. And so someone can come along and say, I want all of the reliable news organizations in Virginia, and the VPA list will be a good place to start. And if that's cross-pollinated with other state press associations and broadcast associations and other major media organizations, all of those connections add up to increase that trust signal that Ralph was describing.
And it also has value to the ad tech, in terms of wanting to place advertising with reputable media organizations and making sure that they're not again, being associated with some of the misinformation sites that Mark was mentioning.
Absolutely.
Now, I know most people are going to ask, how much does it cost? So what kind of costs are involved for our VPA members?
Well, fortunately, VPA was one of the very first organizations that said all of our members should be in this, and is essentially covering the cost of this system. The cost is pretty small. It's because we're mostly trying to run this as a membership organization where the news media itself can self-direct this system. But because VPA and the Texas Press Association, other organizations have taken that on, we have a way to get more of these news outlets into the system, and it sort of instantaneously adds to the number of serious news organizations that we can represent in this system.
I think the short answer is to Virginia Press Association members, it's 0.
You're right. Yes.
That's much more efficient, Ralph. Thank you.
So you have a text file, a trust.txt file created. Do members have to create their own files? How complicated is it to get your file put together or upload it in the back end of your website?
Well, we can make trust files for any of the VPA members and any other news organizations that are part of the system. Others can make them themselves if they want, although we figure it's just easier if we do our best to make one and help them maintain it over time. And in the case of VPA, people are getting trust files from VPA directly, which I think means Rachel directly.
Yes.
So, which is great. And
yeah, we've generated trust.txt files for all of the Virginia Press Association members already. So, and you have them, so they can just get them from you.
Now, uploading them, what we find is that it's almost too simple, because if you've got a lot of news organizations don't have a lot of tech support. And so one of the things that we can do working with VPA is to say, hey, let us help you figure out how to make this work in your publishing system. But for sites that have, say, like a WordPress backend, it's pretty darn simple. And even big major sites have told us that they can do it within a matter of seconds. Sometimes with bigger organizations, people are trying to figure out, like, well, is this going to disrupt our load times or anything like that on our websites? These trust files stand off by themselves. They're incredibly light files. They're not going to slow down anybody's website. But that's a question that smart techies would ask. But once they see it, they'll realize that it's a very simple system. Ralph, do you have more to say on the tech side of that?
No, I mean, I think the other thing is the content management systems, many of them will do that for them as well. So you just simply ask your content management system provider to say, can you please put that on my file, on my in my directory, and they'll do it for you. And if you have any challenges in doing that, we're happy to help you out in any way, shape, or form.
And for organizations, news organizations in VPA or other associations that are part of a corporate group and have a shared content management system or process, there's some efficiency to be able to put those all at once on a series of related news sites that can then help make that connection much clearer, much faster.
Okay. I do have one more question for you guys. So how is JournalList trust system different from other trust and transparency initiatives out there?
It's a great question, because there are a lot of trust and transparency projects that are out there, and they sort of sound alike because they all have the words trust and transparency in the name. But each one is kind of working in a different way. Some of them are focusing on training and working with newsrooms to sort of assess their transparency processes and use that to convey content to their audience and add trustworthy features to it. There are others that are doing detailed evaluations of participating sites and kind of give a credentialing system to it. All of these are great and all of them are important. What trust.txt can do is serve as a bit of a catch-all for all of that so that people can find those things. So we're eager to work with all of the trust and transparency projects so that they can take their participant lists and use that to emphasize who has already been through their process. And it's a great way to telegraph that. So if people are working with Trusting News or the Journalism Trust Initiative, this is one way we can help convey that signal to the platforms and ultimately the audience of the platforms.
Yeah, I would say that it's largely complementary. Because this is really addressing the credibility of a site in total. Many of those initiatives are looking at individual pieces of content and trying to rate different pieces of content. There's various fact-checking organizations that look at those sorts of things. So this is really just a complementary mechanism, as Mark said, that can help elevate the sites as a whole, and then help distinguish things when you start looking at those other more content-specific types of initiatives.
Right. Great. Do you guys have anything else to add or anything else you'd like to mention? I think we have majority of our members' trust files ready and waiting for them to upload. And if they need one built, they can always come to me as well. And we can build out their framework and help them get it on their website.
If anybody has any complications, they can reach out to us and we'd be happy to help. And we're eager to hear about if they want to work with other organizations that extend beyond Virginia and want to add to that as well. We're also happy to help with that. It's been interesting to watch different news organizations in particular states sort of spread it to other parts of their organization in other states, and that's yet another way we're going to make this a valuable system to the whole news industry.
Right. And the more people we can get connected, the stronger we'll all be together. That's
right. That's absolutely right. And anyone can contact us at the JournalList website. That's JournalList with 2 L's.net. And we'd be happy to get in touch, follow up and ask address any questions they may have or help them in any way with the trust.text ecosystem.
Rachel knows where to find us.
Yep.
That is true.
Yep. Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Ralph, for doing this webinar today. I really appreciate it. And I hope we can get some more of our members have their trust framework up on their website and get everybody connected and stronger.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.